Alright, today I'm going to be going over how to make simple 3D objects for Blazium. Lots and lots of folks use Blender, and we'll be using that as part of this process. But there's times where you don't need a super complex 10 billion polygon count object. You just need to throw something simple together, right? And that's what I'm going over here today. For example, a table, right? A table has 4 legs and a top. So that's all we really have to do to make a simple table. And then we can also copy and paste these to save ourselves time. So if we decide we have one table leg that's the right size, then you can go Control-C, Control-V. One table leg, two table leg. Three table leg. Four. Control-C, Control-V. Copy paste. Alright, now we need a top for our table. Now this is one of the wonderful features of Tinker Cad. So if you have an object you want to attach to another object, you can use it at various angles, sides. I mean, forward with a table, I just really need it on top. So I'm going to put a cube here. We have this nice, lovely little white square that turns red. Click and drag on that. Now we've made our tabletop bigger. That's a little unrealistic. So we're going to go here to this red box and make it shorter. There we go. And left, right, mouse combinations. Tinker a little bit on your own to figure out the mouse controls. I'm not going to tell you how to do that. It's something. If you're here to learn 3D drafting or you've already done some 3D game development, you're probably going to be more than familiar with. So I'm not going to beat a dead horse. Pardon the expression. But anyways. So tables typically don't have legs to stick, so we're going to thin those up a little. Now, it would have been easier to get these right the first time, but one of the problems you have is you don't necessarily know how you want everything to look when you start on something. You can just click these sides here. Like, see, for example, here I'm clicking these little dots. That helps me to tell the tool that I want to change the size on a particular axis. Alright, so now we have a table. What do we do with this table? We need to export it in a specific format to make it easier to work through into Blender and then into Blazium. So we click Export. Now in this case, we have the entire shape is everything we want. So we would do everything in the design and then GLTF. Then I just export. Lab. Alright, and then export it on the location you wish to on your local device. Alright. Now, for demonstration purposes, since we're focusing on Tinker Cad, let's go ahead and make a couple more things. Seems a little empty in the game world of just one object, right? So let's have a table. Let's make a chair. So now the cool thing is if you already have a shape, you can copy and paste and make a new shape fairly easy. So we may come back and decide we want to change our table to be a different design later. So we're going to go ahead and take a copy and we're going to move it actually off of our print space. Now, if you were doing an actual 3D printing job, this would be a major no-no. Don't do this because when you go to export it, you're going to have to, depending on your rendering software and the software you're using for your STLs, and this could break stuff. So don't do that. But if you're doing game development, there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. Alright, well, I'm going to go ahead and leave this over here. I'm going to bundle it together so later on it's one object to deal with. And I'm just going to make it a whole. So if I export it by accident, it's not really going to show up on my object. Alright, so let's take this table and make it into a chair. Something of note is if you can, you want to use solid increments. It just makes everything work better. That's the long story short of it. But let's take our table and make it into a chair. Well, obviously, a chair isn't as tall as a table, but we can actually scale these objects in-game and out-of-game, so it's more or less a matter of getting the shape right more than the scaling, as long as the scaling of each of the objects in the shape is the right scale. So, for example, I can have... Oh, let me see here. Let me fix that. Yep. We need to rotate this to make a chair back. So we're going to rotate this at 90 degrees. Now we have a chair back, right? Move that over. Alright, so we're going to need some finer adjustment. So I'm going down here to Snap Grid to change that. Okay. And there's a couple ways you can approach this. Like, for example, if you know that this is a table and you want everything to line up to the scale of a table, if you want everything in your entire game to be scaled to the size of the table as a reference point, that is fine. But if you just want everything to be the right shape and then scale it as you need, that works too. Scaling as you need is a little easier to implement because what if you make something that is slightly off on the scale you wanted by like 1 or 2% or 5% or 10%? Or you have the opposite. You make something that is an extremely complex object that you're going to need to scale down to make it fit. So you don't necessarily want to put 100 hours into perfectly matching all your scaling on each object if you're going to go that approach. But they do need to be connected, though. That's something that's critical. Otherwise, it's going to turn out looking pretty terrible when you go to try and render it. And it's going to confuse Blender and any rendering tool out there potentially. So, alright. This is a pretty hideous chair. But by all means, it is a chair. I'm going to make this a little less hideous. Alright, well, tables are definitely wider and longer than chairs. And again, I'm going to make this a solid number because it's better to do that. I can type today. There we go. There we go. That looks a little more like a chair. And we'll just move our legs to adjust. Okay, so chair legs are usually pretty close to the corners of a chair, so we're going to go ahead and adjust those so they're really close without going outside of the range. Alright, there's 2 legs down. Now you can take a lot more time and design a much more complicated, fancy chair with a lot of these different shapes. I'm not going to, because this is just purely for demonstration purpose. You can take some of these other shapes here and make a much more complex, antique-looking chair. You could take these basic shapes here and then take a cylinder on each side to make it rounded. Ah, come on. There we go, camera. You could put text on it. I mean, there's quite a few options here you can use. There's other shapes as well. There's more than basic shapes too. There's all these extra options in here. So, I mean, if you were doing like steampunk, you could throw like gears on your chair, you know. But for basic exporting, I'm just going to make a chair and a table to start with. Alright, so now there's another option for export you need to be aware of. If you're going to be making multiple objects inside of one, like I've done here, you can see I have the table here and the chair here, right? When you export, you need to go ahead and select selected shapes. But you have to select what you're going to export first to do that. So we're going to click and drag. We're going to go export, and then only the selected 6 shapes. Now before we do that, you want to double check your shape and make sure everything is touching. So you don't want to have any air gaps, so to speak. You want to make sure overlaps are okay, because we're going to go to Blender and square that away there. So, alright, so let's click and drag. export. And we're going to go again to gltf or .glb, export. We're going to call this sample chair. All I'm doing right now that you're not seeing is just a little pop-up window. Depending on what operating system you're using, this is going to be entirely different. So it's actually detrimental to show you what I'm using because every operating system out there has a slightly different UI for this, depending on how it's configured. So just save it wherever you want on your local drive. That's all I'm doing right now. Okay. And that's pretty much it for making a few basic shapes in the Tinker Cad side. Part 2 in this process is going to be importing the object into Blender and then exporting it into a format that is easy for Blazium to use. And again, you can figure out your own methodology and way of doing this. This is just a way that I found out works fairly easy, so that's what I'm going to be demonstrating here. So we're going to go to File, we're going to go to Import, and we're going to choose GLTF. Okay, so then you will go and navigate to the folder where you saved the content at. I saved it in Downloads. Let's see here, Tutorial Artwork. Stop clicking on that. Alright, and then I'm going to click my sample chair and then import GLTF 2.0. Okay, so now it is there, but it is really tiny. The thing I found at the moment that works okay for scaling is to scale it up by 10. So you click the object here in Blender on the node right here, and then you see scale X, Y, and Z. I put 10, 10, 10. Okay, now it's big enough to be visible to make sure everything imported correctly. Hold down your middle mouse wheel, scroll around to make sure there's no more gaps. Make sure that all worked great. Alright, now we have that. All you have to do is export it. It's a fairly simple process. In this use case, I'm going to export it as an FBX file. So I go to File, Export, and we'll look here. There's our FBX, tutorial artwork, and we're going to call this Game Ready Chair. Export FBX. And it's not a very complicated process. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing again, but we're going to do it for the table now. I'm just going to simply go over here and delete this node. Go to Import, GLTF. I'm going to select my sample table this time, and I'm going to select Import GLTF. Alright, and again, it's really small. You can zoom in really far and see it. Alright, sometimes you'll end up with things like this when you import with Tinker Cad. You'll end up with an extra object. Fortunately, this is really easy to handle. Just delete it, select it, and press the delete key on the keyboard. Alright, so now we have just what we want. So we're going to scale it up again. 10, 10, 10. And just another note, you can actually lock the scale on these. So if you do... Oh, nope. That's a different system. Disregard that. Alright, so we scaled it up to 10, 10, 10. So now we have our table here. That's only when transforming. Yeah, it's not manually entering the value. Okay, yep, my bad. Anyways, so now we have our table, and all we do with this is we go to File, Export, FBX, and we're going to call this Game Ready Table. And you click Export FBX. Alright, that's it. That's really all there is to taking it from a Tinkercad object to a Game Ready object using Blender. The final step in the process is to import it into Blazium. And in this use case, I'm just going to make a new scene. We're dealing with a 3D environment, so I'm going to select 3D scene. And then from here, you can simply drag and drop your objects. So go to your file browser on your operating system and select your two FBX files. Simply drag and drop them over here. Okay, so now they exist, and you want them in your game world, right? So you just simply drag it over here and here. Ta-da! You now have 3D objects from Tinker Cad into Blazium. Now, obviously, these are not textured. I am not a texture artist, so that's something you'll have to look at a little more on your own. You can do materials and material rendering. That is another topic for another day with somebody probably that is a better graphics artist than me.